We're very excited. It's every 10 years we go through this process of updating the county master plan. And Daphne and the Bureau of Comprehensive Planning has been doing a great job of getting this all teed up. And so we're very excited to tell you what we've been working on, and then discuss with you all what are kind of the burning issues that we need to address as we start looking into this update. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Daphne to walk through the presentation.
Thank you. Just before I get started, I wanted to take a brief minute to ask some of the comprehensive planners on our staff to introduce themselves. They don't always have a chance to come in front of you, but they're an essential part of, or will be an essential part of this master plan update, so I just wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Tiffany will...
Can they sit at the table? We have space.
Yeah. Oh, sure?
Come on up.
Come on up.
Sit at the table. Yeah, I mean, we got, you know, now everybody that's at the table, you know, you have the responsibility to talk when necessary.
Thank you.
Oh, gosh. I'll start us off. I am Claire Stewart. I've been with comp planning for 8 years. I plan for the greater Finksburg area and then just the town of Sykes, so nothing in Freedom.
Tiffany Fawcett. I am planner for the Freedom area and for 3 districts up around Tawnytown.
I'm Andrew Gray, planner for Hampstead, Manchester area and election districts 6 and 8. And I've been with the county for about 2 years, and prior to that, I was a city planner for Westminster for about 7.
And we also have on staff Hannah Weber, who you just saw this morning. She is primarily a planner for the Mount Airy and southwestern part of the county. And Randolph Mitchell, who works in the Union Bridge, New Windsor area. And we currently have 1 vacant position that we hope to fill very soon, and that's for the Westminster kind of central county area. All right, so as Chris mentioned, we are just getting started with our 10-year master plan update process. And updating the master plan is a super collaborative undertaking. It requires input from a whole lot of different stakeholders, yourselves, chief among them. And so we thought it was very important to begin even formulating a plan for approaching the update process with a conversation with you all to kind of see what's on your minds and what you'd like to make sure we roll into this process. So we have 3 objectives for our conversation with you today. The first is to sort of frame the context for master planning and different components of the process. This may be familiar to you, it may be new information, but at the very least, if there's anybody who's following along with these discussions, it might be helpful for them as well. So I'll take a brief few minutes to frame out what master planning is and why we do it. Then we'd like to get some initial feedback from you on the big ideas that you think need to be part of this master plan discussion. And then finally, get a little bit of direction on the scope of the master plan update. I'll get into this in just a minute, but state law requires that we review and update as necessary the master plan every 10 years, but it doesn't specify how extensive that update needs to be. So that's a little bit of what we're trying to get a sense of from you all as well. So there are 3 things I want to cover in terms of putting this into context. First is, why do we have a master plan? Second is what we're required to address in the master plan. And third is how the master plan is supported by a whole host of other plans and studies and things like that that we have. So since 1964, Carroll County has used a master plan to express its preferences and policies related to land use. It's really a tool to guide how the county directs its growth, where that growth happens, and the different tools that are put in place to support those preferences and policies. So things like development and zoning regulations, public investment in facilities and infrastructure, land preservation priorities, environmental protection, those sorts of things. So master plans are recognized as an essential way that local government supports orderly growth, efficient provision of services, and responsible use of resources so that the public health, safety, and welfare are protected. So that's where we get our zoning powers. It's why we're even able to do this, because at the heart of it is the protection of public health, safety, and welfare. Master plans also provide the community with a certain level of reasonable expectations about what their living environment, working environment looks like now or could look like in the future. So it establishes the desired pattern for residential, commercial, industrial, employment, agricultural, and natural resource land uses. And based on this, we as a government can effectively plan for public facilities and services, transportation networks, preservation of lands where that's important. And this in turn leads to a certain level of assurance by property owners with what their community will look like and how they can use their land. So the master plan sets all of those expectations in place. The state of Maryland has recognized the importance of master planning as a local government tool, and therefore delegates that planning and zoning authority to local jurisdictions. In Carroll and other non-charter counties, this is done through the land use article of the Maryland Annotated Code. And the land use article requires that a local jurisdiction enact, adopt, amend, and execute a plan that includes specified elements, and that the plan be updated every 10 years. The land use article also establishes that the Planning Commission is the body that's charged with actually developing the plan. But they recommend that plan to the local jurisdiction, to the governing body for adoption. So it's kind of a joint effort there. And we can get into how that process might unfold in just a few minutes. So as far as what's required to be contained in the plan, it has to have goals and objectives, and it also has to address a series of elements that the state has laid out. So those include land use, transportation, community facilities, mineral resources, and water resources. It also now requires a housing element. So this is a new element, relatively new element. It is not an element that, at least according to the land use article parameters, is contained in our currently adopted master plan. So we would need to have, at the very minimum, a new land use element as part of this master plan update. I'm sorry, a new housing element as part of this master plan update. We can also include other sections like development regulations, sensitive areas. A lot of plans will have implementation elements. It's really sort of up to the Planning Commission what they'd like to add to this minimum list of elements. A few other things that are required include interjurisdictional coordination. We also have to make sure that the plan is reflecting the state's 12 planning visions. And lastly, we are required to hold public hearings as part of the adoption process. I'll add as well that the Planning Commission is charged with promoting public interest and understanding in the plan, and so generally what that includes is a series of public engagement, public involvement forums throughout the process of developing the plan. And very quickly, how other plans support the master plan. So you've seen a number of these things come before you. Usually, these are plans that are, other plans that are developed sometimes by planning and land management, sometimes by other agencies. You'll sometimes hear them referred to as functional plans. It's things like the Water and Sewer Master Plan. We have a transportation plan, a bicycle and pedestrian facilities master plan. But it's also things like the educational facilities master plan that the Board of Ed prepares, or the hazard mitigation plan that emergency management prepares. as well as the Land Preservation Parks and Recreation Plan. So all of these are meant to sort of feed up and be an expression of the master plan, which is the overall blueprint for how things should unfold in the county. And then lastly, I'll say that our capital improvement program is a primary way that the master plan is implemented. So whether it's recommendations in the master plan or these other functional plans, they all will often have a capital aspect to them, which gives life to the recommendations of the master plan. And so projects that come through in the capital improvement program are usually somehow reflected in some of these higher level documents. And a lot of things actually are required to show that they are consistent with the master plan. So there's an idea there that what we're undertaking as a county through all these different projects and policies are an expression of the big picture ideas that were laid out in the master plan. All right, so what does a master planning process look like? Generally speaking, any kind of strategic or master planning process follows a three-part process. You've got an assessment phase where you're kind of saying, what's our starting point here? What do we know about this situation? And that's meant to then inform all of the other subsequent phases. So the assessment phase answers the question, where are we now? It's our opportunity to evaluate our current conditions, things like our population's characteristics, development trends that have been happening over the last 10 years, the needs of the community for services and facilities, and importantly, progress made towards implementing the last master plan. So we do this every 10 years, and part of that process is to say, what's changed since the last master plan was adopted? And what do we need to reflect in this new plan so that the future that we're planning for responds to the current dynamic of things on the ground. It's also an opportunity to see what else is going on out in the rest of the world. So regional and national trends that we want to keep our eyes on and potentially respond to. One of the ways that we will typically do this is through a SWOT analysis. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or as I like to rephrase that last one, challenges, things that are really, really tricky to come up with some solutions to. That also is a way of kind of saying, where are we right now? What are we dealing with? Ideally, once we have a good understanding of what our starting point is, we can move into the direction phase, which is answering the question, where do we want to go? We're looking ahead, we're trying to plan for the next 10 years. So this is our opportunity to set goals and objectives and make recommendations for how we'd like to see things unfold over the next 10 years. It should be based upon that informed understanding of things that we gained from the assessment phase. But this is also the meat of the planning process, really. And I'll say it's where a really difficult balance often has to be struck between competing goods. You've got a lot of things that you'll want to try to achieve. It's not always possible to achieve them all, or sometimes you can't achieve one fully without affecting another. And that's a really difficult balancing act. This is also where we'll begin to start creating maps and other tools that help us explain in visual and documented format how we want to proceed with things. And then the final phase of implementation answers that question of how we'll get to where we want to go. It's where we put the details into the plan recommendations about programs or policies we want to put in place, about partners that we want to involve in the implementation, and even things like potential funding sources or timing for trying to make some of these things a reality. Stakeholder engagement is a huge part of our master planning process. In fact, I would say that most of the master planning process is a series of conversations with all the different stakeholders that are involved. How that shakes out into document form, can almost happen offline, but those conversations with the key partners and stakeholders are the real heart of the master planning process. So building support for the plan through these conversations is really essential, and communication and engagement with all the different people who want to be part of that conversation is a key focus of what we're talking about here. And some important stakeholders include all the different community members that are out there, residents, business owners, property owners, elected and appointed officials, so yourselves as well as your different boards and elected officials in the county's municipalities. So municipalities as well as surrounding jurisdictions. We can't operate in a bubble, so we do want to hear from our neighboring counties about what they've got planned on their borders and where there might be some synergy between what we're thinking and what they're thinking. And then, of course, county and state agencies who are usually the implementers of these planning documents. Just very quickly, what this process could look like. I've touched on some of these things already, but as I said, this is a series of conversations that we're talking about here. And these can unfold in lots of different ways. They can be work sessions, they can be scheduled meetings, they can be public input forums. In particular, I want to look at some regular work sessions with you all and with the Planning Commission, both separately and jointly, so that we're making sure everybody is on the same page. Also, focus group conversations, so we've got different demographic groups, different special interest groups that we want to hear from who might have a unique slant on what they're looking to, for the master plan to say about the future of the county. Consultations with municipalities and neighboring jurisdictions, as I mentioned. And then just regular points of contact with county agencies, with the public, all throughout the process. We definitely don't want to have a document come out, a year and a half from now that nobody's had any contact with, and then ask people, what do you think? This should be an iterative process, an ongoing discussion, so that when we get to the end point, hopefully we've got some good buy-in. So we're looking at both formal processes, public hearings, that kind of thing, as well as a series of informal ways to engage folks. As far as communication strategy, that's something that we're definitely going to need to put in place and leverage to the greatest extent, so that these meetings that we schedule, these conversations that we schedule are known. People know that they're welcome and are able to participate. So working on developing a website presence through our county website, leveraging social media channels, maybe even doing things like developing a podcast series or creating some interactive mapping tools that we can use. Just trying to hit all the different ways that people like to communicate and be engaged. We know not everyone's online doing all the techie stuff, so super low-key in-person meetings are a great opportunity to hear from folks. Surveys, we're working on a survey that we can push out to folks to get some feedback. Really just trying to get as many different channels of communication going so that this is an interactive process. I'll touch on a few of the things that we're already working on in this assessment phase in just a minute, but we're working on developing some materials that'll help us fill out that picture of where our starting point is. Lastly, on process, you're probably wondering how long this will take. Some of that is to be determined depending on what direction we get. But optimistically, we're probably talking about an 18-month-long process. We do have state-mandated time periods at the very least for doing public review of any plans that are put out there for adoption. That has to at least be 60 days. And so when we're talking about all of the assessment, direction, and implementation phases, an aggressive, optimistic schedule would be about 18 months, but it really depends on what kind of direction we get for it. And we would be looking at doing a little bit more of a public launch in the fall. Okay. So we want to ground ourselves in this assessment phase and start to look at what kinds of the big ideas we need to make sure we're included in here. Before we jump into that discussion, which I want to make sure we leave, the bulk of our time for, I do just want to give you a little bit of a sense of what we already know in terms of the existing 2015 County Master Plan and what progress we've made. So the 2015 Master Plan had 93 separate recommendations. I can't go point by point through all of them. We are tracking sort of informally how we're making progress in addressing some of those. So I'll give you a little bit of the highlights of what we've been able to accomplish. So these 93 separate recommendations are contained under 15 goals, and they touch on everything from ag preservation to community preservation or community participation to economic development, and appropriate areas for growth. There's been a lot happening over the last 10 years in all of those areas. So a few highlights that I just want to give you in terms of what the plan was trying to accomplish. So the focus of that 2015 plan included things like directing development to appropriate areas, to protect resources and efficiently provide facilities and services. That's kind of a big overarching focus of the plan, as well as promoting a balanced approach to new development and economic opportunities that's consistent with our existing communities. So balancing new and existing development. And then in rural areas, preserving and promoting the county's rural agricultural heritage. So we have this kind of two-part approach to growth and preservation. As well as promoting land use practices that protect and minimize the effects on the county's environmental resources, and balancing planning goals with a respect for private property rights. Of those 93 recommendations, 17 have been fully implemented. About another third of them have had some level of implementation, and about 15 are being implemented on an ongoing basis. They're kind of policy recommendations that we haven't changed our course on in the last 10 years. Major accomplishments have included revising Chapter 158, our zoning ordinance, to address ag, conservation, residential, commercial, industrial, and employment campus districts, and then a subsequent countywide comprehensive rezoning in 2021. We also revised Chapter 155, the development and subdivision regulations, to streamline the development review process. The Freedom Community Comprehensive Plan was adopted. The Finksburg area was designated a sustainable community, and we've been awarded funding to study the bicycle and pedestrian network there and pursue facade improvement grants for enhancing the gateway. We've participated in several transportation corridor studies to pursue improvements on 97, 32, 26, and 140. We've approved the Transportation Master Plan and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Facilities Master Plan. We have ongoing participation from the county staff on regional and municipal heritage tourism efforts. And we're continuing to implement resource management programs and practices such as stream buffer protection, forest banking, water resource protection. We've also undertaken several studies, including the Economic Development and Land Use Study, the ongoing housing study, and a Rural Villages study, all in support of the master plan update that we're kicking off here. So a lot of progress. Staff has begun collecting some of the information that's going to really help round out this question of where are we now. So we're pulling together what we're calling a data book, which is a whole bunch of statistics and data visualizations that'll touch on things like demographics, land use and development trends, the economy, health and well-being, infrastructure, community facilities and services, those sorts of things. So that's the statistical and numerical side of that. And then we're also preparing some very short, like 2 to 3 page topic papers on what we call topics and trends. They're things that are sort of circulating out in the wild here related to population changes, housing demand, stresses on land use, demands for infrastructure, and how we protect a sense of place. So these kind of more broad-ranging topics that are probably going to be part of this master plan update conversation, and we'll want to get some information on to prepare us for that. Lastly, we kind of beta tested a SWOT exercise with some county staff to see what their perspective is on the county's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and I'll call them challenges. Of course, county staff are involved in some of the nitty-gritty details of what's going on in the county on a day-to-day basis, but most of them, or a lot of them, are also county residents themselves, and so obviously have a perspective on some of the strengths and challenges that we encounter in the county. So just want to give you a few key takeaways from that, just to say, you know, here's where some of the initial feedback that we've heard lies. So strengths that they pointed out were things like good schools, a strong sense of community, ag and open space, low crime rate. Opportunities included the opportunity for growing business and tourism, for creative and innovative housing options, entertainment for all ages. So those were sort of the big picture strengths and opportunities. When it comes to weaknesses and challenges, these are probably not anything new, but things like a need for infrastructure to enhance revenue opportunities, a lack of affordable housing options, and constrained water and sewer systems that prevent our growth in areas where this infrastructure exists. It's also things like congestion on our major state roads, or limited opportunities for industry and high-paying jobs. So again, this is just a very small sample of folks that we involved in this exercise and what their feedback was. Things like this SWOT exercise and surveys and things like that are the types of tools that we can deploy at a lot of different levels to get similar feedback from folks throughout this process.
And could I ask, I apologize, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
Would you be able to send us those notes when you're able to? 'Cause there's a
Absolutely.
lot of information I was trying to take down.
I know.
Some of it, so
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
thank you very much.
Don't feel like you need to write down a ton of things. I will definitely provide this to you. If there are thoughts that strike you as we're going through this discussion, though, please make a note of them, make sure we hear from you in the course of our discussion, which leads me to our next slide. I provided you with 4 kind of high-level discussion questions that I'd like to spend the bulk of our remaining time going over. We don't have to do these in order, so whatever kind of strikes you as something that you'd like to share, but let me just read through these for the benefit of everybody else. What we'd like to get from you for the rest of this time is basically some initial direction. We'll be having the same sort of conversations with the Planning Commission on their thoughts about, what this master plan needs to entail and address. But I think they would really benefit from having some initial feedback from you on these questions as well. So we'd like to just get your initial take on some of these. And I'll just put a huge caveat here, which is these are really big questions. And there's no expectation that we're going to have, all the answers to them, or even that there is consensus on them. But I think we want to get some initial feedback if you have some ideas to share. So the questions include, what is the county doing well when it comes to land use and planning? Where are there areas for improvement? What big ideas will the master plan need to address from your perspective? And then a little bit of future casting here. 10 years from now, when we have to look at this plan again, what would you like to be able to hold up as major accomplishments? So 10 years from now, what would we like to be able to say we were able to tackle and achieve? So with that, I'll open it up for discussion, or if you have any questions on anything that I just covered, please jump into.
When you talk about SWOT, which I can appreciate, definitions mean a lot. So you walk into an issue and into definitions. So strengths and weaknesses look internally, internal to personnel, to internal to processes, procedures. Opportunities and threats, or as you say, challenges, are external.
Right.
What are the opportunities that we have assets to reach out to? Resources we own, assets we leverage from the state and other jurisdictions. Do we have the right relationships with the 8 municipalities? Is that, and that's a tricky one, because they're part of the county, but they're not part of the county. They have their own ordinances and internal relationships. So are they doing their SWOT, and are we, and how is that dovetailing? So that's huge. Eldersburg being, not that it's ungoverned, it's that it is, what do we say the word is? Unincorporated. Is definitely a challenge. And, how do we look at the Freedom District and Eldersburg as an entirety? Are we looking at the appropriate, and I appreciate you threw in their revenue somewhere, are we looking at the appropriate revenue necessary to live within the means 10 years from now? I will tell you, we're not today, because we have fire EMS and Blueprint and other things that we're trying to achieve, but we don't have the revenue to pay for it. And we're living, I believe, on borrowed time by using one-time dollars for operational costs. What is the growth going to show us in 10 years, the demographics? Are we going to need an additional school or two, or are we going to need different infrastructure? But whenever we look at the expenses and the growth and the development, we should be also looking at the price tag associated with it, and where is that revenue coming from? Because this last 10 years, it's about the same time when we did the master plan. Shortly before that, they made a decision, us, the Board of County Commissioners, to lessen the revenue coming into the pockets of the county. And it put us in a situation where we are today. So I think we need to really take a hard look at that. I mean, I got lots of different notes. I appreciate all of what you've done so far to initiate the thinking caps. Getting this out, this is a public meeting, get the community's input, communications, it could be social media, it could be, like you said, podcasts. I do the town halls, which are, I believe very valuable. And, this will be my next town hall. It will be the focus for the Eldersburg area. Say, this is what I want to talk about. We have 2 large growth areas down there in the Freedom District. And one of them has got a lot more energy than the other, but they're still moving forward. And are they going to provide the revenue that we expect them to provide to go the next master plan and provide the quality of life that, they could provide? Or are they just going to be, a land grab of, space? And if it's the latter, we're doing something obviously wrong. If it's not the latter, and it's what we're intending, and I think because of the definitions and everything, we're in a good position for them to have significant revenue coming into the county. But that can't be thrown out. I mean, everybody wants to talk about the fun things and the good things. If we don't talk about revenue to spending on the quality of life, safety, security, the schools and everything else, then we're just missing. And I don't know if 2015 did that or not, but I think that's pretty important. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
So,
And
no, go ahead.
and I kind of have questions for you guys. My opinion, in the last 10 years, Carroll County hasn't grown much. We don't have much commercial and industrial. I see other counties that have a much stronger base, which we'd like to. I don't see much encouragement to do affordable housing, PUDs, mixed-use stuff, whatever. And of course, all of you can have your personal philosophy of, I hate growth. I think it should be total chaos and grow however much they want, or we need to have controlled growth. And I've always advocated for controlled growth. And I'd love to hear from you guys, maybe not today, maybe not even in a week, what changes would make it easier to make certain things happen? And I look at it, and I know Commissioner Rusty and I have talked about it for about 4 years. The whole adequate facilities thing, my opinion from the other side of the fence, that was done to slow down growth. If, particularly with 33 million thrown at them, if EMS would say, no, we can't protect this new development, I'd have a struggle with it. I don't know why we want to try to control how schools redistrict. That's none of our business. I don't care if the school system thinks Hampstead Elementary is too full and there shouldn't be a development. My opinion is we develop and they figure out how to educate the kids. So I think maybe most of that ought to go away, but does that help, or does that open up Pandora's box? You know, I'd be curious to hear from you guys, what changes did you hate to see back in 10 years ago, and what tied your hands instead of helping you, and you know, what's a dozen things that you guys would love to see to help with things? You know, how, we talk about wanting more commercial and industrial, but then if two people don't like it next to them, we don't do it. You know, it's, yeah, I mean, maybe we're a bedroom community with 170,000 people, and that's how it's gonna be for the next 30 years. And then we need to say, okay, that's how it is. We need to raise taxes on residents because that's the only way we can fund stuff, and life moves on. You know, it's, and I wasn't here for this. I'm not, well, I guess I am condemning it. But the last commissioners took land in Eldersburg that had water and sewer and changed it from R20 to R40. Well, that's a frickin' waste of ground, and one of the, trying to be tactful, less things they did that I agreed with. You know, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you, you know, I have no problem with saying, okay, you want to develop this 250 acres, and I think it'd only be 150 homes, but I don't care if they're on 5 per acre lots, but give us a school site and a park. You know, it's nobody, none of the young generation wants to mow an acre of grass. They just don't want to do it. So why would you have a house on 1 acre that has water and sewer? That's just, I couldn't even believe that would happen. But again, maybe you guys will say, oh, that was the best decision we ever saw, that really helps us. But to me, it's and not as a developer, as a resident, that's a waste of land. And we don't need to waste land. We don't have an, you know, we can't, and I know this board's talked about, well, we need more commercial, we need more industrial. Well, unless we change zoning drastically or invade Adams County and take a couple thousand acres, we can't increase it. You know, how do we best use it? So I'd be curious from you guys, you know, if you think, do we need more commercial zoning? I like what we have right now with commercial. I just think we need to have the intestinal fortitude to let it happen. But, and then back to affordable housing, as a developer side, the market takes care. You know, if everybody's buying $800,000 homes, why would I want to build a 200 one? But if everybody would buy 200 ones, then maybe that should be encouraged. So I don't know. I'd like to hear from you guys a little bit on what's needed. And I think in the next 18 months, you'll get plenty of input from us, but I'd like to hear what the professionals think. And some stakeholders too. You know, it's again, if you say, well, we don't want a house built in Carroll County that's over 500,000, and 10 developers say, well, fine, I guess I'll build in Frederick County, then that didn't help us, you know. But what can make it work?
I think that, if I could just jump in really quickly, hopefully some of the information that we're gathering as part of this assessment process will help us illuminate some answers to those questions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but I gotta think, I know none of them in this room would do that, but you've gotta sit in your office sometimes and say, we're looking at this plan approval. If those damn commissioners hadn't done this rule, I think this would be easy, you know? And I assume you've said that sometime, and tell us, you know? Let's deal with it.
And I agree, you know, continuing on with what Commissioner Kyler and Commissioner Rothstein both said, you know, what is it that is in the current master plan that has not worked or hasn't come to fruition? You know, what did the current master plan not anticipate happening? what assumptions were made in 2014, 2015 that were wrong, that we got wrong. And kind of going off of that as well, I'd like to see a copy of the 1964 master plan to see what the foundation of all of this actually was to begin with. I know Commissioner Rothstein and Commissioner Collier both mentioned commercial and industrial zoning. I know that a number of municipalities in District 1 have mentioned to me that they're interested in changing some of their zoning away from residential to commercial or industrial, and that'll certainly help the county. And what areas of the county that are contiguous to those municipalities might we be able to alter zoning with to facilitate that, not just for the municipalities, but for us as well. And of course, to that end, we have recently, within the last year, we've, authorized that priority review process, and how might that ultimately factor into things as a whole with the master plan and with moving forward in general. One of the things that, came up for us within the last 2 years, and Daphne, you mentioned the myriad ways that we can be in touch with citizens to see what they have to say about things. We talk about what people want to see a lot, but what is it that they don't want to see? For example, when we got in, and I'll speak for myself here, going through the election, I maybe heard one or two things about community solar. And then we took office, and it was something that overwhelmingly citizens just did not want to see. And so I don't know whether or not that was, opening up farmland to solar back in 2014 or 15 was an anticipated goal. But in a situation like that, how does something that occurs, such as community solar, how does that ultimately affect the trajectory of the master plan? I guess that kind of goes back to my previous thought that, what in 2014-15 was not anticipated, and when something like community solar does come up, how does that ultimately affect the overall master plan, or even planning for future master plans? In terms of agriculture and in terms of ag preservation, again, I know one of the newer things, when I was in college, for example, if you went to a winery, you were either, somebody's grandparent or you were wealthy, but now everybody wants to do it, right? And so going back to 2008 when I graduated, that I could imagine that was probably not in anticipation for the county, that we wanted to make sure to have zoning that was amenable to wineries or to breweries or whatever the case might be. So, what trends are we seeing that we might be able to adjust for that are coming, especially with respect to ag tourism? And then the last thing that I'll mention, because I don't want to take up too much time, one of the other things that I've noticed in the last 10 years has been a move away from more traditional parks toward more nature-centered or minimal impact parks, where almost maybe like a preserve in a way, or like a national park, but at the county level. People want to be able to walk, to bike, to be out in nature and not necessarily see 10 tennis courts or a soccer field or a football field or something.
But if they're all pickleball, we're good.
The pickleball's acceptable.
Keep going. Keep going.
So basically, yeah, things of that nature, right? Again, finding ways to connect with citizens to see what it is that they want to see, but also what they don't want to see, too. And then, again, specifically, looking at things from a historical standpoint, what did previous master plans envision for us to be where we are now? What was completely off the mark? What hit specifically on the mark? And again, I'd like to see the 1964 plan to see what the trajectory was when all this began.
And I think all the points made have been very good and valid, and, to Commissioner Vigliotti's point, what do they don't want to see? But I guess the question that kind of falls after that is, if you don't want to see that, what's the cost going to be? I mean, we had this recently in planning and zoning, I guess it was last week. There was discussion of a grant that we were going to accept for putting in a trail, walking trail. It's $200,000, county taxpayers, $20,000, 10%. But then there's nothing to maintain that 5, 10, 20, 50 years down the road. So to, Commissioner Rothstein's point, we're taking all these additional costs. It's not that that trail's bad, but how do we afford these as we're adding on, be it, through a myriad of ways, be it grants or other things. So I think that's something the public's got to be aware of. If we don't do X, we're going to have to contend with Y. And if Y becomes, we want to be a bedroom community, but you want to pay a ton of taxes, who wants to live here, who doesn't? I'm not saying either way, I support that, but just where does that take us? And yes, we all know the market on housing is significantly high right now. We just saw this week in the front page talking about a housing crisis. But, and yes, those builders are looking to build at a certain threshold. But like I've mentioned to a couple of my colleagues, and I know I've talked to staff about, I think we need to take a serious look at MPDUs and decide, is that an opportunity to try to have some accessible housing for your fire, teachers, police, average people that can't afford a $500,000-$700,000 house or whatever we end up at. And I think, you know, a number of years ago, I had asked somebody on staff here about mixed use. And they're like, well, that's conditional. And I'm thinking, it's used so many other places nationally, locally. It was in Frederick, you know, Baltimore County, and then the individual at the time I was talking to was from North Carolina. And, you know, for a number of years, and I'm not saying it was right or wrong, good or bad, you know, we had a tendency to build these big developments that we put out expansively, whereas now you're looking at this mixed use where it's building up. So you're having sort of the old school mentality of the shops are on the bottom floor and people living above them, where, you know, generationally people would be the shopkeeper and they live above it, which today that's not the case. But, you know, to Commissioner Kyler's point, if people aren't looking to own that acre of land, we've got to figure out how do we change or amend housing to work for that group of people, because we are not, in my opinion, being very competitive right now on a youth market. I'm seeing and hearing from various people that their kids are leaving and going to these other counties because we don't have the inventory. And the reality to me is we want to cover a wide bandwidth in a portfolio of housing. But I do think, you know, very good question to ask, what do they want, but what do they not want? Because I think it's very easy to say, I don't want X, when I don't realize what it's going to cost me on that other side positionally. And, you know, I do agree, I'd love to see what that last master plan was, you know, what did we miss out on? Are there things in those areas? And then I know we've got, you know, the two growth areas, you know, I know Finksburg's been kind of, if I remember correctly, and Chris, correct me, I think it was amended as to what the utilization was at one point. Am I right about that? Or, I know there was something that was modified.
The Finksburg growth area was reduced significantly
That's
by the
correct.
59th Board. It had been much larger, and I think it's now basically just the 140 corridor. It's like about 600 acres maybe, and it was like twice or three times that previously.
I mean, I guess the one question I would have, and I'm not saying I support it or I'm against it, is there some better utilization of that corridor? You know, what do we do? Because, you know, clearly, we're adding so much more to the mix, so how do we afford to pay for it? That's sort of where my general thoughts are.
There's a few things. Commissioner Kyler shares often what are the secondary, tertiary effects of making decisions. If it's good over here, then it should be good over there. And, you know, you don't say no to one, you know, area because 17 people say something, but the effects are going to be on 27 other properties throughout the county. So we've got to look at this county-wide, which kind of segues into a discussion about the master plan and the freedom plan. The freedom plan, you know, when I came into office, I inherited it from the board previous to me, that it was approved. The freedom plan, how it segues or nests into the master plan, and then how does the zoning decisions nest into the freedom plan that nests into the master plan. And there were definitely some discussion points that we had challenges with. I mean, Commissioner Kyler and I will not agree on lots of things. Some of the decisions that were made the last board were good decisions, and I believe they were. And the decisions on, that were put on our laps regarding the redistricting, not redistricting, excuse me, the zoning. That was a lot of work.
Comprehensive rezoning.
Comprehensive rezoning. And that was a multi-year effort. And the solar discussion was about a year and a half. It goes back to something I shared earlier, and that's communications. Did we have the ability to communicate to all of the necessary stakeholders to get the input necessary to allow us to make the best decisions? At that point, we thought we did, and we made the best decision with the information we had. And other decisions made. These are the type of things, the Zabel property, the zoning, a compromise was developed, on that zoning. Is really what ended up happening. And how did it fit and go along with the Freedom Plan that nested into the master plan? And again, those are some of the difficult things. We gotta be careful that we don't cut a nose, spite the face type of thing. Man Valley, when it was built, was that part of the master plan, from 2015? And if it wasn't a part of the master plan in 2015, then why was it allowed to be built, which then took away X amount of capital dollars for a lot of other things? And North Carroll High School was that, in accordance with the master plan, being determined to close. I don't know, I was not part of any of those discussions, but those are the type of things we need to really focus our attention on. In, the military, I'm all about planning. That's my life, and that was my livelihood for a long time. We have what are called branches and sequels. Do we have the ability to develop branches from decisions and decision points that we make in the master plan and say, yeah, we're going along, goals and objectives, let's continue to the next objective? If not, then what's the branch that we need to take? Do we not have the revenue necessary to do the next step? If we don't, then do we push the timeline out a year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever? Or do we stop it and go back onto the timeline for another topic or another objective? Sequel is basically you're parallel to the decision, the timeline that you're making. Do we have the wherewithal to develop branches and sequels in the master plan? I think that's something that needs to be one of our strengths, and we need to strive. These are all the internal strengths that we need to, I believe, strive towards. Again, Commissioner Collier shares a lot, the secondary tertiary effects, it's huge. And it ends up, well, the Freedom Plan, why are we like the highest tax-paying area and we're providing all of the opportunities for ag preservation outside of the Freedom Plan? And we're not allowed to do ag preservation in Freedom Plan. Well, we are. It's just not getting out there, that the Freedom Plan is allowed to have ag preservation. Again, communications. Up in the north, it'll be, well, we don't have internet, and everybody down south has internet. Why don't we have this? Getting the communications and expectations is huge. At the end of the day, in 2035, what does Carroll County want to look like? And in the safety, security, best schools, quality of life, X, Y, and Z. Start there and work ourselves back, I think, is a good way of looking at this. We're not going to have cars that fly in the air, but I guess we'll have more electric cars, supposedly. I don't know. Leave that alone. But at 2035, this is how Carroll County wants to look. Here's the expectations of having 182,000, population. Here's the demographics. What do we want to look like going backwards? Or do we have the designated growth areas defined appropriately? Should they be more restrictive or restricted in size? Or should they expand? There's thoughts on both. Municipalities. It's so difficult. Do we have the right relationships with the municipalities? I definitely believe that that's a weakness, and it shows without a doubt. So, but.
And it's curious, it makes me think, you guys talking, for one thing, the master plan, so the first one was 1964. Did we do one every 10 years? Is this the 7th one, or did we skip? And then I'd be curious to see, are there things we change that then we change back 20 years later, and maybe rightfully so because times change, maybe because we made a mistake. And then we talk so much about affordable housing, and my opinion is we fight the possibility it can never happen. I know Marty Hill did some stuff in Manchester that I guess was Manchester, I don't think it was county. He did open section streets and blacktop walks. We'll see other places where we're saying, well, developer, that's a connector street, you need to do 28 feet wide, concrete curb and gutter, and sidewalks, which unfortunately quadruples stormwater management and storm drains at the same time. Well, I can't develop that property and do a house under 700,000 because I can't afford to. I can't do those improvements and do it. So do we really, we hear about too much impervious, but in some ways, we just fight to increase it. Do we really need, a 28-foot wide road with concrete curb and gutter, and sometimes, you've seen it, sometimes you got 3 storm minutes next to each other just to try to do the drainage, and all that costs money, and I know there's a mindset that, well, like you hear now about inflation, it's just because the big companies are making so much profit. Well, they need to make profit or they don't exist, and if you raise their costs by $2 million and there's 200 houses, you do the math, and what did you increase a house? I don't know. It's all, like you said, all that stuff's two-edged. And you guys did make some smart decisions, and,
There's also the mindset that if it's county-owned, it should be to the community, build gardens and build parks, and don't allow what? If it's commercially owned, the county should purchase it and build parks and other things. And getting that across on the limitations of the county, and we like it that way. I want the county to be engaged as less as possible, and allow property owners to take advantage of all the rights that he or she has for their property. Let's put our money where our mouth is and put our guidelines. If we want to be a safe, secure, quality of life community, if we want to eradicate or minimize drugs, in Carroll County, what are the tools that we're going to use to minimize the impact of drugs? We have no influence on shutting down the border in Mexico, but we do have influence on putting beds where they belong to taking care of a community. And those are the type of things that I think, governance at our level should be about. It's not about all these policies. I mean, I'm interested, but I'm interested in, here are the things I want to keep. I want a safe community, quality of life. I want to be secure. I want the best schools, So if that means focusing my attention on this opioid issue, which is going to last more than 10 years, what the heck are we going to do about it? And what can we do here and now about it for the next 10 years? That to me is critical. And like I said earlier about behavioral health and health department, I wish they had double the amount of people because they're working hard, but I want to be able to resource them and us to taking care of our community. Pushing it away is not the answer. That is not the answer. But that needs to be an issue that needs to go into the master plan, something like that. Just achieve the things we can achieve, Can't boil the ocean. But what we can do is we can take care of the puddles that, are around us and the community.
And that's a good point. Pie in the sky is wonderful, but you have to be realistic. If you make goals that, I always tell kids, you gotta make high goals and you're not gonna achieve them all. But if you don't achieve any of them, something's wrong. Either you're setting them too high or you're not working. So, yeah, maybe we need, Jack Liburn, bless his heart. Carroll County has affordable housing. It's just in Littlestown, Hanover, and Shrewsbury. Well, I said, that's not even funny, but maybe that's the fact. Maybe we just need to recognize, I saw somebody the other day, a young couple wants an apartment in Hampstead or Manchester for $1,000. Maybe we just need to say, sorry, that ain't possible, but I'd like to think we don't have to say that, but maybe we do, we gotta set realistic expectations.
Commissioner Guerin, did you have any thoughts? Or?
I just, it's going to be, I think it's going to be very important as we move forward. I know this process is going to last for a while, so we'll have plenty of time to comment, but we try to keep things focused. We don't get too much into mission creep. I do see the issue of our roads in the county being a severely limiting factor on what we're going to be able to do unless we really want to focus on the widening of roads and things like that, which I think we should. I can speak, anecdotally for my district and how bad 27 and 26 is, and don't try taking a left turn in Mount Airy, certain hours of the day. It's just not going to happen. It's been mentioned a few times, but for every time we ask somebody what they would like to see, I would like to pose the question of, well, what don't you want to see? It's not hard to look around at existing neighboring counties and see a lot of things you don't ever want to see happen in Carroll County, and people are smart, like they recognize that. They're not stupid. A lot of them have moved from those areas to Carroll County for a reason. So I don't think we have to guess, how things might look if we make wrong decisions, and those counties seem to be constantly in a struggle to try to find ways to pay for what they have. So I think you've heard a lot of good thoughts and ideas as we've gotten started here. The idea of looking ahead 10 years and deciding what we want to look like is probably a very good idea. Not that we're all going to agree on that, at least the 5 of us sitting up here, but that would be a great question to ask the people in this county, because people do, I think most of us are examples, people do stay here. And sometimes we leave and then we can't wait to come back. And that's sort of a lot of the case as well.
Tell you, you made a great point, I think, on roads, because at first I'm thinking, our county, we have a pretty good road system. Again, drive to Pennsylvania where everybody's going and they ain't so nice. But every road you mentioned was a state highway.
Right.
How do we get the state highway to do what we need them to do in Carroll County? And I think we try, but I don't think we have a whole lot of success.
And then maybe that's and you make a great point, and maybe that's part of our bargaining, the way we can bargain with the state to try to get some of the things that they want in order to try to get some of the things we want, is trying to push up some of those projects perhaps. I know we do the CTP letter every year.
Yep.
I know in time those things get addressed, but what I have to tell residents in my district is you have to wait a while unless something drastic happens. So, yeah, that's a great point, though. Maybe that's something we can use to bargain for certain things that the state wants if they help us with roads. I don't know.
So, I've taken a lot of notes. And I'm trying to just see if I can sum up some of the things that we've heard. A few of the things that I've heard repeatedly have included the need to look at, that the master plan needs to make sure it's also looking at what the costs are for these decisions, and how, if we want to go in a certain direction, that's being looked at from the revenue perspective. And that kind of feeds into a lot of the other things that I heard. So things like, how do we look at maybe our development regulations, or the tools that we have in place that could be modified to support the kinds of things that we want to see happen, particularly when it comes to things like commercial industrial development, possibly even relooking at our designated growth areas and how big they are, how small they are, and how they kind of feed into this bigger picture of creating a safe, secure community that's got a high quality of life, great schools, things like that. Housing has been mentioned a number of times, and of course, we're doing the housing study right now, and we'll need to incorporate that into the master plan just because of the new requirements, but that'll be an ongoing discussion. And then, of course, a lot about finding all the different ways that we can reach out to folks to hear not just what they would like to see, but also what they don't want to see, and then using that to evaluate, again, some of these trade-offs. So much more was talked about, but I think we've got a good sense of what are the key things on your mind right now. Just in our remaining time, I know a few of you have some commitments at 1 o'clock, so I do want to just touch on a few big questions that'll help us start to frame out what this process looks like. And those are these. The first one is, just from your sense of things, are we talking about a major overhaul of our master plan, the 2015 master plan, or minor course corrections to kind of respond to what's happened over the last 10 years? And then perhaps associated with that is this question of how we want to handle our two unincorporated growth areas. So that's the Freedom area and Finksburg. Historically, they've been treated different ways in our master plans historically. Sometimes we've sort of carved them out because they each have their own comprehensive plan, and I think Commissioner Rothstein talked about some of the challenges of that. There are pros and cons to rolling them into the master plan. One of which would be that if we rolled it into the master plan and kind of made the comprehensive plans obsolete, then you do away with that tradition that's been in place since the 70s of the Freedom area and, to a lesser degree, the Finksburg area, having its own specific comprehensive plan with its own unique set of recommendations and that sort of thing. But on the other hand, making that area part of the master plan and including recommendations for that area in the master plan itself gives us a little bit more of a cohesive sense of vision for the whole county and allows us to have everything all in one place. So those are just some of the pros and cons, but
Daphne, one of
yeah.
them, a perception is, again, focus on municipalities. Municipality has a mayor and a council focused on the municipality. The designated growth areas has a commissioner amongst 5 that is elected in that area, whether it be Freedom or Finksburg. And it's, that perception of 1 of 5 has a different influence than a mayor and town council for the entirety of that municipality. That has been brought up regardless of how strong or weak the commissioner may be, but no. It is 1 of 5, and that, has been brought to,
And Finksburg
attention.
has a group.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
pretty
and
vocal.
so does,
And I
yeah,
think,
Freedom.
I can give
Yeah.
you an easy answer. I tell people, you're either growing or you're dying. You don't stay the same. Finksburg without water and sewer is dying. And it's, I don't know what the thoughts were 10 years ago or 20 years ago there, but it's not going to be much more there.
Yeah. And,
It is.
yeah, and Freedom has a community group, which is 1,000+ people on this page or whatever, but there's, seems to be, as I say, 7 or 8 people that like to chime in and, understand what right looks like, and that's okay. How do we unify them to get a larger voice? in the Freedom area. But again, it's the communication piece, but it's also that perception. And perception is reality in a lot of this. So how do we develop, the perception that we want to be the actual reality and put resources to it? I don't think we have the resources to put towards the Freedom District the way, like I said, the municipalities have their resources. That's just reality.
And I think you're right, perception is reality, and I don't understand or remember why and how that Freedom Plan was developed, but by nature, people grab at whatever they can grab at when they want
right.
something, and so they're like, well, that's more important than zoning. Well, no, it's not, but, so
I
you
agree.
gotta watch what you put in this stuff, because, they're gonna find the loopholes.
Yeah, they, as the community, is going to find the answers that they want to achieve through whichever documents will allow them to use, whether it's the master plan, the Freedom Plan, or the zoning. And we came across that over the last few years, and it's a challenge, which one has precedence. And when the commissioner signed the Freedom Plan, that's now, a law compared to an ordinance, but it becomes very challenging, So, yeah, I agree. We need to look at that, whether it's a great question, and I don't think we can answer it right now, but I think we can look at the value in both sides. Ladies, you're gonna help us do that, because you're the outreach, to the different areas. So, okay.
And I do think it's a good question, but I also think, we've got, whether it's communication, there's also that educational component. Because yes, perception can be reality, and sometimes perception is completely wrong. I mean, it was sort of like when the economic development land use study came out, and, we're hearing constantly, and no disrespect to those that perceive this, but we have all this unabashed growth in Carroll County, and then we see the actual numbers, and you're like, sorry, it's not what you think it is just because X and Y is being built. So I think, it's beholden on all of us, be it the elected staff, everyone, to educate people, because yes, perception can be reality, but also perception can be just that, incorrect, and be perception. I think both of these are great questions. I think, and I'm just going to jump for a second to the other one, I think the thing, at least from my perspective, is I'd want to take a good review of that previous master plan before I'm going to say I think it could be minor, because I'm not really certain, what all is encompassing in that, but I don't know if we're all looking to reinvent the wheel or just trying to tweak it a little bit, but I'd like to take a look at it first.
Yeah. So it sounds like on these two questions, and I know I was kind of doing a little bit of a gut check, if there was any sense among you that it was an obvious answer to either one of these, but it sounds like what we gather as part of this assessment phase will help answer some of these questions in the course of time. And so we'll just continue to look at sharing that information with you and framing out how we approach this over the next, several months or so. Which brings me to next steps, and just to say, first of all, thank you all for sharing your thoughts and giving us some good direction, as well as some things that we'll follow up with you on. What I'd like to do is essentially have the same type of conversation with the Planning Commission and get their thoughts on what this could look like, and then put together a proposal for how we might want to have this process unroll. And then I'd like to find some time when we can do a joint work session with you all and the Planning Commission to go over that and kind of officially launch things, so everyone's on the same page and we can
What's the
move
timing
forward.
for something like, when would that happen?
I would say probably end of summer-ish.
So
Yeah.
2 months or so.
Yeah, give us some time to get to the planning commission, which probably won't be until their work session at the beginning of August. And then, of course, just working through the scheduling issues.
After Mako.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if possible, I'd like us to meet again once more, once we have the 64 master plan and we look at the 2014, 15 again. Or was it really 64 or 65 master plan?
64.
64. So, I guess if we could get together as a group ourselves, all of us, one more time before going to the joint meeting with the planning commission, just to, I guess, further elucidate some of the things we've talked about.
Okay. I do think, and I'll do some digging, but I'm pretty sure that the 64 plan was basically a map.
It's a map.
Some of these, I think somebody asked.
Plans have evolved.
Yeah. So, I mean, we haven't had regular 10-year updates because they weren't required until just recently, and they were required every 6 years until a couple years ago. Before that, it was kind of whenever you felt like it was time to update your plan. So we'll gather a little bit of a history for you, and for sure, try to provide whatever we can as far as what that starting point was, and then maybe a little bit more of a deep dive on the 2015 plan,
That's a
what it
64
said.
master plan.
And
It's online.
I don't know whether there may be some newspaper articles about what the commissioners were discussing at that point, but anything like that would be interesting for the sake of context.
Okay, great. All right, Chris, did you have anything else you wanted to?
No, just wanted to thank everybody. This is exactly what we were looking for, is what are your thoughts and kind of the big picture ideas. We've got some homework to do ourselves, that we'll pull some documents together, give you some homework, and we'll meet with Planning Commission and plan on having another meeting with you all to further the discussion. But this is the first meeting of many, because this is important. The master plan kind of, it guides a lot of decisions that we and the municipalities and so on will be making for the next 10 years. So can't stress enough that this is a very important exercise that we're going to be going through, and we want to really capture your thoughts and how we're going to guide that document. So thank you all.
Oh, and one last thing, I apologize. Maybe, I don't know whether or not this is already considered part of the process ahead, but do we have like a group meeting with the municipalities, like representatives from the municipalities themselves as a large work group or something? Is that within the realm of you know?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, and yeah, we're following your guidance on this. So whatever meetings and so on you'd like to have, we are more than happy to facilitate.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for this.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and everybody tells me I'm too stoic and never smile. I'd like everybody to smile once before we go. Because don't make it look like this is a dry subject. Don't make this is fun.
Motion to adjourn.
We have a motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Thank you.
Opposed? Oh, everybody wants to adjourn.
Thank you.